Hello and welcome once again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
And we are the
FAIRtax Guys.
And I am going to see some fun today. We have got another special program here. In fact, this is going to be the beginning of a series of FAIRtax Power Radio episodes in which we explore and shoot down a lot of the misinformation, and we will be nice and say some of it's just out of ignorance, but some of it is just not telling the truth on purpose.
Yeah.
There's a lot about the FAIRtax out there that's circulating around that just is not true.
Yeah, we don't want to actually say that people are lying about it, but when it comes right down to it, that's what they're doing. A couple of years ago, my wife and I were invited to this one group. It was about an hour's drive from our house to talk about the FAIRtax, and we went out there and we met with about 20 of their members and put on our presentation of the FAIRtax, and it went very well. People were very interested, had good questions and so forth. A few weeks later, we get and this group met every month. A few weeks later, we got a call from the organizer and said, we have another person coming, putting on a presentation that he calls the flaws of the FAIRtax. Oh, okay.
Well, nobody's perfect, but we're...
Well, yeah. Hey, I'm a retired science teacher, all right, school administrator. If there's somebody that has legitimate concerns about the FAIRtax, I want to know about it, all right, because it's part of my education in promoting the FAIRtax, and if there is a real problem, I want to know about it. So, yeah, we went back out there and we listened to his presentation. Now, my wife gets very passionate about these things, and I had a heck of a time keeping her from jumping out of her skin at what this guy was talking about, but he and other people that have tried to criticize the FAIRtax have given us kind of an anthology of how the FAIRtax will be attacked, when it gets into Congress and they start talking about it. So that's what Bob and I are going to do with this and some subsequent programs.
Yes, we're going to take some of the common things that you will hear about the FAIRtax that aren't the truth, and you will hear the truth here in just a second, and I get to role play this thing.
Yeah, Bob is going to be Mr. Ebenezer Scrooge.
Yeah, I get to be the guy that shoots the bullets at you. So strap on your steel underwear here and get ready to go. Ready? All right.
He is entirely getting into this role.
Yeah, well, I know what's up. You FAIRtax people are just trying to pull the wool over a lot of people's eyes. You're trying to sell this thing as a 23% tax, telling folks that if you spend $100, 23 of it is FAIRtax, and you call that a 23% rate. But what you're actually doing is you're taking a $77 item, putting $23 worth of tax on it, and that is a 30% tax, my friend.
Well, you got me. 23% inclusive or 30% exclusive. It seems that the figures don't lie, okay? However, there is one question. I mean, I've got a lot to talk about here, but there is one question. Whether we call it 23% inclusive or 30% inclusive, how does that change the amount of the tax? Is it still $23? Well, as it turns out, it is. So this is a case of jumbled semantics, all right? Whether we're going to call it 23% inclusive or 30% exclusive. But let's take a look at some other examples. Income tax, all right? Or gas, the price of gas. When you buy some gas, that includes a whole bunch of taxes, like 60-something cents, for a gallon. And that's inclusive. You never see the taxes that are in the price of a gallon of gasoline. But let's go back to the income tax. Let's say there's this young person just got out of college, landed a terrific job at $50,000. They sign a contract with their new employer, $50,000. Now, I suppose that means that they're going to take home $50,000, right? Wrong. All right. If they're earning $50,000, according to the tables I have in front of me, they are in the 25% tax bracket. And that means that $12,500 of their new salary is going to go to Uncle Sam. And their take home is going to be $37,500. All right. Wait a minute. That means their new salary includes the income tax. That means the income tax, the current income tax, is inclusive. Oh, heavens to Murgatroyd. how can we do this? I mean, here we are talking about, well, the fair tax is 23% inclusive, 30% exclusive, when nobody seems to complain about the income tax, which is inclusive. Oh, and of course it doesn't stop there, because along with the income tax withdrawal or withholding, you've got FICA, 7.5% or 7.6%. So anyways, we currently have a number of inclusive taxes, including the income tax. All right. When we contract for a certain salary, we know as adults we don't get that salary because a good chunk of it goes to Uncle Sam. How much depends on what tax bracket you're in, but it's still inclusive. So, yes, people can make the argument that it's 23% inclusive or 30% exclusive, but it doesn't change the amount of tax being collected. It's an argument for the sake of argument.
Yeah, but I tell you what, if you get this fair tax thing, you're going to add 30% to the cost of everything people buy right now. You're going to drive people to the poorhouse.
Now, we have made the case in previous episodes of FAIRtax Power Radio about what's going to happen to business, what a boon to business the fair tax will be, because it removes, like 80, 90% of their compliance costs, because they spend a great deal of time, effort, and resources just complying with the income tax, just making sure that they're doing it right, that they're taking advantage of every deduction and loophole and exemption there is. The larger companies have to employ batteries of tax attorneys and CPAs and so forth. That's all money that's not going to grow the company. That's money that's going to keep their butts out of jail. Precisely. And so the compliance costs and the income tax going away is going to be a big boost to business. Now, what are they going to do with that money? Well, I've heard people say, they're not going to pass it on. They're just going to keep it. Well, where are they going to keep it? Are they going to stuff it into some giant mattress someplace? Somebody told me, who's an expert in economics, that the definition of savings is deferred spending. They're going to spend it at some point. They're not just going to keep it. What are they going to spend it on? Well, they could increase their employees' salaries. They could drop the price of their product. They could increase the dividends to their shareholders. There's all kinds of things they can do with it. I can't tell you exactly what it's going to do, but I can tell you businesses are going to reap big savings. And when that happens, and with competition, prices are going to come down 10, 15, maybe 20%. I don't know. So the fair tax is going to be added on, to the cost of the product, but the cost of the product is going to be substantially less under the fair tax than it is right now because of all this nonsense. And if you think that these companies are not going to do this, then you're thinking that somehow under the fair tax we enter this alternate reality and there's no such thing as competition. All right, we have competition now, right? When you go to buy a new coffee maker or something, you look up and you find the coffee maker you want, and then you go see who's got the best price on it. Apparently, these people who think that the companies are not going to compete with each other under the fair tax think we're going to enter this alternate reality, and they're not going to compete. So all the coffee makers will be the same price. All the gallons of gas will be the same price. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. Competition and the business reality is going to bring prices down, and the fair tax will raise the cost somewhat. But after everything gets leveled out, after a year or two, you're going to see a boon to this economy like we haven't seen probably in our lifetimes.
No, the boon you're going to see is the underground economy, people trying to avoid this thing, a 30% tax. You don't think people are going to try to avoid that?
Well, I would advise when you go buy groceries, don't go to the underground economy. I really, want to warn you against that. Where are, I've heard people say this before. Where are these underground economies? I don't understand. Where are you going to go? You're going to go to Walmart and you're going to walk out with let's say, it's almost the beginning of school, and you're buying back-to-school clothes and supplies for the kids, and you're going to go up to the cash register in Walmart or Target or Kmart or whatever with a whole bunch of stuff and say, hey, psst, I'd really like not to pay the fair tax. You think that's going to work? Where the heck is this going to work? 90% of the sales in this country are at a small number of the big box stores. So that's just not going to happen, the underground economy. All right. And if you want to talk about an underground economy, let's look at the current income tax. Boy, talk about people putting money, earning money and not reporting it. We hear about this all the time. We hear about people that have all cash businesses and never, ever report it. Not to the Uncle Sam, not to their state sales tax department. This happens all the time, and it keeps the the agencies busy trying to catch up with these folks. We mentioned before, Mr. Scrooge, that on this program here, that the income tax right now, the IRS admits that there's at least a $450 billion tax gap of income tax that they should be collecting, but they're not, because it's so easy to evade. $450 billion. Divide that by 320 million, you get over $1,400 per man, woman, and child that somebody's not paying, and we are. So talk about underground economies and non-compliance. The current income tax takes the cake. I mean, it's just amazing. The fair tax is going to level out the playing field. It's going to be very difficult to evade. And there's one more point about the fair tax. Under the fair tax, if you want to evade it, it will take two people to conspire to evade it, the buyer and the vendor. Okay? Both people have to agree to evade it. Under the income tax, it only takes one person to evade it. You just don't write it up on your income tax, or you don't file an income tax at all. All right? So now the fair tax is going to be much more easy to comply with, and it's going to boost the economy like crazy.
Okay, let's hit on a big one here. The fair tax, everybody knows it's a sales tax or a consumption tax, and everybody knows consumption taxes, sales taxes, they are regressive. This is going to be, if you guys get this fair tax thing you want, it's going to be a huge tax cut for the wealthy, a huge tax increase on the middle class and the lower income. It's just regressive, and it's going to hurt the poor, and you know it.
Well, Ebenezer, again, you're just not listening to me, okay? In fact, folks, if you go on to popvox.com, which we've talked about before, and you look up HR 25, and when you look at the negative comments, I like the fair tax, I don't like the fair tax, the two most common comments are, one, it's not a 23%, it's a 30%, and two, it's a sales tax and it's regressive and it hurts the poor. Immediately with that second one, when people say it's regressive and it's a sales tax and therefore it's regressive and therefore hurts the poor, you know immediately they have not done their homework. All right, we have spent a lot of time talking about the prebate. The prebate is one of the most important parts of the fair tax, and if you've been listening to our programs or read the book and so forth, the book, or going on to the website, you understand that the prebate makes the fair tax fair. That is what reimburses everybody, not just the working poor, but everybody. Everybody pays, gets the prebate. Everybody pays the fair tax. The prebate is what reimburses families for the fair tax that they will be paying on the basic necessities. So, like we said before, a family of four, mom and dad and two kids. The Health and Human Services have indicated that it takes about $31,000 to provide the basic necessities for this family of four. All right, and that will include, when they go out and buy groceries and pay the rent or the mortgage or buy the clothing and so forth, and basic medical care, they will be paying the fair tax on that. And they're going to get that portion that is the fair tax reimbursed to them in the beginning of the month in a prebate check, debit, deposit to their debit card, check in the mail, what is probably done electronically. All right. So the prebate erases that regressive nature of the sales tax. A normal sales tax is regressive. That's true. The fair tax is not a normal sales tax. And the Americans of Fair Taxation, that's one of the first items they addressed, and they addressed it with the prebate. So when somebody says it's a sales tax and it's regressive and it hurts the poor, you know immediately they really have not studied the fair tax, and you should encourage them. At least go to www.fairtax.org and do some reading. Get the book, the Fair Tax book by Bortz and Linder. Do some reading. Learn about what you're talking about. So, Ebenezer, what else you got?
Well, you keep telling me that we get this fair tax thing. People are going to bring home 100% of their paycheck, that the withholding goes away. I can understand that if you're going to get rid of the income tax. But you're also telling me that you're going to get rid of the Social Security tax and you're going to get rid of Medicare. I want to keep Social Security and Medicare. I do not want a program, the fair tax, that's going to obliterate those programs.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I totally agree with you there. And in fact, what we need, let's see, right now, Social Security and Medicare is supported by the FICA tax. And the FICA tax is paid by people who get a paycheck. It is not paid by people who get dividends. All right? Very wealthy people that don't necessarily go to the office every day and draw a paycheck, but they have investments, and they get dividends from their investments. And they don't pay FICA taxes on those dividends. So right now, Social Security and Medicare is being supported by people who get a paycheck. Now, yeah, that's a lot of people, but it's not all it could be. So what we need is a system in which the Social Security and Medicare is supported by everybody. Every person in this country, let's say when they go to the store and buy something. How about if part of the sales tax that they pay goes to Medicare and Social Security? Well, that's exactly what happens under the fair tax, all right? Social Security and Medicare are two programs that Americans want, Americans like, and they will be better supported under the fair tax than they are now, because everyone who goes to the store, whether they're just going to buy a $20 item or whether they're going to buy a new Learjet, Bob's Learjet that he's talked about several times, or the Bentley, and whatever they're buying, it's going to have the fair tax attached to it, and some part of the proceeds of that fair tax must go to Social Security and Medicare. Now remember, H.R. 25, the legislation for the fair tax, is only 133 pages long, and you can scroll down there and find out the part about the Social Security, and it says right there that there's a formula there. A certain percentage of the proceeds from the fair tax must go to Social Security and must go to Medicare. So, under the fair tax, these two valuable programs will be supported better than they're being supported now, because we have the figures on when these programs are scheduled to predicted to go bankrupt, because they started out with having back in 1935, I think it was, they had about 40 employees per retiree. Well, now it's only 3, and so it's getting down there. Pretty soon they're going to be dipping in and taking out more than they're putting in. So we need to pass the fair tax if we're going to support and if Social Security and Medicare are going to survive. We just absolutely need the fair tax.
All right, you keep talking about how this fair tax thing is going to get rid of the IRS. What you're really going to have, you're going to have a bigger, more intrusive enforcement mechanism. I mean, what happens if I go down to the store, I buy something, I pay the fair tax, the shopkeeper keeps it rather than sending it into the government, and the government's going to be coming after me for that money?
Yeah, because, everybody knows, especially if you pay cash for it, they're going to have to go through a lot of trouble finding out, well, just who was that guy that bought this item that Mr. Shopkeeper, you didn't send the tax in? Yeah, that is so disingenuous on so many levels. Mr. Scrooge, I just don't understand how you can be coming up with this stuff, all right? 45 states in the country have a sales tax. And if somebody doesn't pay the sales tax, well, it's the vendor who gets in trouble. If the vendor is not sent, and I can tell you here in Florida, because when my wife and I had our little truck leasing business, we had to pay sales tax on those lease fees. And we had to set up a special account just to send that sales tax to. And if we didn't, well, We always did, so I don't know what happens if you don't, but I do know that they're pretty aggressive with the sales tax because, again, here in Florida, we don't have an income tax. We have a sales tax, and they're very good about collecting that sales tax. So it's on the shoulders of the vendor to make sure that they send that sales tax money in. If the vendor's not collecting it and not sending it to the state, it's the vendor that's going to pay the price, not the individual consumer. Has anybody in any state with a sales tax ever heard of the state sales tax department showing up at the customer, the buyer's front door saying, you didn't pay sales tax on that pack of bubble gum you bought the other day? All right. That just doesn't happen. All right. They don't go after the buyer. They go after the vendor. Sales tax are being taken care of by the vendor. And it also points out that the infrastructure for collecting the fair tax is already in place. 45 of the 50 states have a sales tax. It's just a couple of extra lines in their computer code to collect the fair tax along with the state sales tax and put it in a special account and send it off to Uncle Sam. It's not a big deal. And for those 5 states that don't have an income tax, well, they can have a neighboring state help them institute the necessary hardware and software. They can do it themselves, or they can have Uncle Sam come in and do it. But the IRS goes away. I mean, there will be no Internal Revenue Service because it will be eliminated by the fair tax legislation once it's passed and signed by the president.
But I don't want to give my Social Security number to everybody, every vendor that I do business with. That's none of their business.
And you're absolutely right, and you shouldn't do that. I mean, you want to keep that stuff to yourself. Of course, it begs the question, this is totally aside, but Social Security was never supposed to be used as an identification number, but we sure do seem to be doing that. But no, you don't need to give it. I mean, how many times when you go to the store now do you have to provide your Social Security number? Okay? You may, if you're writing a check, have to show them your license or something to prove who you are. But if you're just go to the store and you whip out your credit card and you pay for that, boom, you scan your credit card, you're done. All right? How many times did they ask for your Social Security number? Well, if they're not doing it now for the state sales tax they're collecting, why would anybody believe that they're going to do it for the federal sales tax? It just doesn't bear up to logic. So, no, the only time you're going to have to divulge your Social Security number is once a year. You're going to send a little tiny form to the federal government saying, these are the people in my household, all right? And these are their Social Security numbers. And they do that so that you can get the proper amount of prebate, because back to the prebate, it's dependent on the number of people in your household, and that's all. So that's the only time. Otherwise, people ask for your Social Security, well, you can tell them to, well, I won't say what I would say, but you can tell them to buzz off.
Oh, well, you would do that in a nice, professional, and easygoing manner here. Well, I'm afraid that I don't have any more time to throw any more questions at you today, but I will be back next time.
Yeah.
And you had better be ready to answer some of these things because the fair tax is...
I bet you will. Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and let me get out of character here and switch back and say, this is fun.
Yeah, he seems to be enjoying himself.
I get to shoot at you here. Let's see, if you're out there listening to this and you really do, you decided you want the fair tax, we need grassroots support to make this happen. How is the best way to go about that?
The best way is to go to fairtax.org and become a member. And please make a donation. And if the spirit moves you, join the 1040 Club. In the 1040 Club, you commit to sending $10.40 a month to the Americans for Fair Taxation. Remember, we mentioned this before. We are a totally grassroots organization, all right? And we run on donations. Now, it used to be, before they elected a popularly elected board of directors, that there were a few wealthy millionaires in Texas who supported the day-to-day operation of the fair tax. That has gone, away.
And they did the $20+ million worth of privately funded research to make sure this thing is going to work.
That's right.
But those guys, in fact, one of them's dead. And so
several of them have passed away.
So again, they now have passed this off to a grassroots effort now.
Yeah.
And so we don't quite have the big bucks behind us that they used to. But there are big donors. I understand that Randy Fisher tells us this, that there are big donors kind of waiting on the sidelines to see if the Americans for Fair Taxation organization can raise enough grassroots support to be viable. And when they are convinced that that is the case, then they will jump in and help. When
we demonstrate that we can stand on our own 2 feet, as Bob says, we have some deep pocket donors that are going to help us out, because we need national TV spots. We need national newspaper spots. Those things are very expensive, and admittedly, we can't afford that right now. But if we get the grassroots to support the day-to-day operations, the database, the FairTax Friday, the this, the that, then we will be able to encourage these large donors to really kick in. And then we're going to see some stuff happen. Then we're going to see really good promotions of the fair tax, because we need to get it out so that, well, as my wife commonly says, we need to make the fair tax as common as the Golden Arches, all right, so that everybody knows of it. When they see that fair tax logo, they know exactly what it is.
Okay, well, one thing you can do is just simply contact your congressmen and senators. And a great way to do that is with PopVox, Popvox, or, of course, if they've got an office there, you can go by and see them. You can call them, you can email them, but make your opinions known to your representatives.
Yep, and remember Steve Hayes' interview in programs 16, 17, and 18. And by the way, I strongly recommend, if you haven't listened to the 3 parts of that interview, I strongly recommend. But one of the things he said, yep, PopVox is good, Facebook is good, and so forth, but nothing beats a call to your congressman's office.
And that's what Ted Yoho told us a while back, too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When we talked to him.
So don't be afraid to call these folks. I mean, hey, we're all adults, aren't we? We can call these folks. They're supposed to be working for us. And so learn about the fair tax and call your congressman and your 2 senators and tell them you expect them to support and co-sponsor the fair tax legislation. All right? If we get a bunch of people doing this, it has a very positive effect.
And we would certainly like to hear your input. There are a couple of ways to do that. We have a Facebook page. You can go to facebook.com and do a little search on the FAIRtax Guys.
Yep.
You can leave us a question there. We do have an email address, thefairtaxguys@gmail.com. So if you've got a question or a comment about the fair tax, something you'd like to see addressed here on FairTax Power Radio, we can do that. Again, that's the FairtaxGuys@gmail.com, or go to our Facebook page, the FairTax Guys, there on Facebook.
And don't forget our monthly webinar. It's a free interactive webinar on the fair tax. It's the 4th Thursday. Look it up. Go to thefairtax.org and do a search for the webinar. You have to register in advance. They provide a little link. And we put it on our Facebook page, and I send it out on Twitter and so forth. So take a look and sign up for this webinar.
And that is interactive. If you have a question during the webinar, you can type your question in there, and the webinar folks will see it and will answer it.
Yep, and they're very, very knowledgeable. As I said, Mark Maneri and Larry Walters run that webinar. They've been doing it for over 5 years now, and it's really a good way to interactively learn about the fair tax.
Okay, so again, let's encourage people to join AFFT, Americans for Fair Taxation, at fairtax.org. 1040 Club, if you can do it. That's $10.40 a month, and we'll make this thing happen. The politicians and lobbyists are going to do it kicking and screaming, but with enough grassroots support, we're going to make it happen, okay? Yeah. So again, that's going to be it for this edition of FairTax Power Radio. Again, I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
Reminding you once again, the fair tax, once you understand it,
you'll demand it.